Welcome to the Still There Postmortem. Still There is a psychological point-and-click adventure game. It was published by Iceberg Interactive and released in November 2019 on PC, Mac and Nintendo Switch. Hi, I'm Davide Barbieri, co-founder of Ghost Share Games and game director, lead programmer and puzzle designer of Still There.
Hello, I'm Daniele Giardini, aka Demi-Giant, and I'm a former comic writer artist, a game developer, game designer. I make tools for Unity, and I'm the lead narrative designer and writer of Still There.
Hello, I'm Gaetano Renardi. I'm an art director and a concept designer, and one of the three authors of Still There. I'm the founder of a small design company called La Boîte that produces research and development for pre-production. Currently, I'm working on the art direction of an animated feature film for Netflix.
We are the three former authors of Still There, and even if we held different roles, each one heavily contributed to the game art and narrative design of the game. Still There would have been entirely different in each of such aspects if any one of us would have joined the development. We have known each other for years and sometimes collaborated on the same projects as freelancers, but we had never created something together before. The music of Still There deserves a separate discussion. Ben Barnes has joined the team later and created the game soundtrack by following his own inspiration and vision.
Hi, my name is Ben, and I made the music for Still There. I'm so happy to be a part of this team. I'd known the devs for a very long time through Twitter, and we were always sharing projects and kind of chatting game development stuff that way. But when they started coming together, I had the privilege of being asked to work on the project with them, and I'm so happy that I was able to do that.
The project started as a mere experiment. We didn't have a business in mind. Our intent was only to see what the union of such different experiences would lead us. We just wanted to create something original and possibly something beautiful. We wanted to create a game with an exciting narrative component.
The narrative was obviously very important to us, but not just as a classic thriller plot. We also wanted to tell more, to talk about mature themes like loss, grief, and political issues in a way. So we mixed a lot of things and we tried to add a lot of layers to what we were talking about.
This is exactly in my wheelhouse for the types of music that I like to do. Just kind of really soft and contemplative with some really electronic vibes in there too.
After brainstorming the story, we came up with the idea of a space lighthouse keeper, receiving a signal from a spaceship captain in distress, asking for help and support.
The goal was to do an analogy that conveyed a daily routine like a workplace or a sense of mystery.
That kind of come along with isolation where there's nobody around, there's nobody there, and it's just you and the environment that you're in.
One message that the game tries to communicate is that each person comprises a whole universe, packed into a tiny amount of space.
Minimalism is one of the strong themes of Still There because we have a lot of elements that are boxes within boxes and that you will uncover only if you try to find the additional layers or the symbols. And in a way, every character is a whole universe packed into a very tiny amount of space and of time. And the elements too, the bento station especially, symbolizes Carl itself because it's a representation in a way of his mind, of his psyche. Every element inside the station somehow connects to Carl's story, to why he's there, to what he lost, to what he abandoned.
So the space station bento becomes a character. Carl is the bento and the bento is Carl.
It's no coincidence that in Still There, the player's point of view is perfectly centered in the bento station for the entire duration of the game. The player is still free to rotate on a hypothetical wheelchair, which allows him to move from room to another and to interact with any object of the station using a point-and-click interface.
The station is full of quotes, books, punk rock stickers, origami, magazines.
And some unusual stuff like an old-fashioned computer inspired by the Apple Macintosh 128K, a MIDI keyboard used to send radio beacons,
and obviously an authentic Italian mocha coffee maker.
Every single detail is carefully studied, using stereotypes and clichés to build a bridge that would connect the main character Carl to the gamer. To explain this concept, a good example is the yellow post-it that I put around in the belt station. I want to prick the gamer memory, evoking his office workstation. Imagine all the post-it around the monitor, or the shopping list attached to his fridge.
We even gave a personality to one specific piece of equipment, which is Gorky, the AI, which has an actual narrative arc like all of the other characters, and like in every, let's say, good narrative, he changes from the beginning of the story to the end like a real character, because that's what it is after all.
It even implements a fully functional chess engine. An interesting fact is the first match the AI presents to you replicates the first match Garry Kasparov lost against IBM Deep Blue in 1996. You can continue that match from the moment Kasparov resigned, but in this case playing the role of Deep Blue the machine.
The interaction of Still There is very similar to adventure games, which were a big inspiration. So you have objects to interact with, to combine, puzzles to solve, systems to investigate, dialogue trees to explore and direct, and all the usual stuff, but revisited and reimagined in what was for us a peculiar way.
During the pre-production, we aimed for different gameplay. The interaction were more similar to Papers, Please by Lucas Pope. Each task was time-based and had a money reward. Later we found that such gameplay does not go well with the slow pace and reflective mood of the game. We had to fall back to something different. So we sought innovation on the kind of reasoning used to solve the puzzles, trying to replicate the feeling of a person stranded in space with technical tasks in its daily routine. We removed the time-based aspects from Carl's work routine, so it became a storytelling device better integrated with the game's mood. We identified two main parts in the game, the cockpit and the dream sequences, each one with its own development challenges.
From the Alien's Nostromo spaceship, I took inspiration for the day-life objects. From Brazil by Terry Gilliam, the grey working routine of every day. Or from The Think by John Carpenter, the old chess computer game in very old computer graphic. I also studied some old shuttle blueprints. This led myself toward in a retro analog style. Switches everywhere, cables, jacks, buttons.
We had the idea of creating an experimental mixture of traditional and procedural art for the visual aspects of the game. We didn't want sprites to appear just static as in many 2D video games. On the contrary, we want to make them react to light and user interaction. For example, most of the objects on the bento reflect the mouse cursor. That means most items in the station have a dedicated hand-drawn light map just for this purpose.
About the Carl's dream, each author at least did the direction of one of them.
The problem was more artistically related than technical. The idea was to mix traditional and procedural art, but how to set up a collaborative way to let the hand-drawn art and the shader art cooperate to the same result. Eventually, we set the general aesthetics of the dream sequences in a mood board, and then we used it as a source of inspiration for the shader creation process. We also wanted to add a sort of psychedelic nuance to the overall mood. We thought that creating some weird animation using fragment shaders could be a good idea. After some experimentation, we created a procedural background to give context to the dream. Then, the main subject of the dream sequence was hand-drawn and put into the scene. Anyway, further cooperation between hand-drawn art and programming was needed to animate it and better integrate it within the context.
even though the game is set, it's set in a singular like room, just a space station. You're still exploring Carl's mind and his psyche and his hallucinations and a lot of other things that have to be represented with music in a very different way than the mundane day-to-day life. For the main gameplay loop, where you spend most of your time solving puzzles and just kind of exploring the space station, that is very, very ambient, to the point where I actually went and sampled heating vents or like AC vents and groaning metal, almost like you're in a submarine where you're just kind of contained in this metal box, and it has all of these sounds and feelings. So a lot of the mundane stuff, the day-to-day stuff, is very, very ambient and very focused on piano. But when it gets more abstract, when it gets more surreal, then you start bringing in the electronic elements. You start bringing in a lot of the other types of music that can make things feel like things are a little bit askew. I think the first song that I did is Diamond Conundrum. And this song I wrote when I saw the initial trailer, where Carl kind of had his hands up going through these like diamond shapes. And it was such a compelling visual that I had to find some way to get that motion and that energy without feeling overwhelming too. Like, I really love Diamond Conundrum because it has this calming feel to it, but it's also very active and moving. Another one of my favorite parts of the soundtrack is at one point in the game you're allowed to choose music to play, which is very cool because it's not making music related to the game itself. It's making music that exists in that world. And I think that those songs in particular offer a great deal of like emotional power because of that, because the player is choosing that music and resonating with that music because of their choices. And I really love those songs that you get to choose that way.
Given the considerable amount of elements in the cockpit, we soon realized that drawing and exporting every single sprite independently from the others would be unhandy and too much time consuming. So we had to find a different solution. We decided to compose the scene in Photoshop instead of the Unity 3D scene editor. We developed a custom tag system for Photoshop layers and an import-export tool for Photoshop and Unity 3D. So, each time we modified the art or introduced a new item to the scene, a custom script had the task to divide, to trim and export the differences to a set of PNGs and JSON files. An importer used this result later to integrate such changes.
For all the dialogues we used Outspoken, which is a writing tool, a Unity-based writing tool that I actually developed before Still There, and then we used in there, that was made so that we could really collaborate into how things connected, and egotistically I could just write the way I wanted. Also, it was very nice actually to use it there because Davide constantly broke it because he wanted to use it in different ways than what I expected, which was actually very good. So it evolved a lot while we made Still There.
I did get a lot of reference material when I was working on the soundtrack, but I was also given free rein to kind of do whatever I wanted, which was really great. It allowed me to kind of explore different ideas, and sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't. I know that there was at least 4 or 5 songs that kind of ended on the cutting room floor just because they didn't really fit the style.
This freedom helped a lot to express the creativity.
But that doesn't mean that this didn't come with its own set of challenges. There were a lot of really interesting artistic decisions that had to be made when working on a project like this.
All the process was very fun and also very hard. Many people believe that the visual communication is based only on the production of beautiful images, but this is just a superficial concept. Like any form of communication, it has a grammar in which words become icons, objects, emotions. Let's say that the greatest effort was more the study than the realization itself.
We work hard to give a logical sense to any single switch, valve, monitor, and machinery. We even designed a technical manual for that. Then, we created a series of challenging puzzles and connected them to specific events within the plot. It was a total experiment, so the result was pretty uncontrollable. The responsibility of keeping together art, narrative, and gameplay was quite challenging, especially considering that each of these compartments was conducting its experiments on its own. We started working on the project totally on our own, but at a certain point we decided to find a publisher to complete the development and ship the game. That was the moment the experimental approach ended. The project left the pre-production phase, and we switched to something more traditional and predictable for the production phase. We decided to pack up a prototype and present it to the Game Connection 2018 in Paris. We were quite lucky. On the first meeting of the Game Connection, we found our publisher. The pre-production started in mid-2017 and ended in late 2018, while the production took just 6 months, including the porting to Nintendo Switch, localization and beta testing. The production phase was flawless. We respected all the milestones and completed the game perfectly on schedule, which apparently is something very uncommon in the video game development business. We didn't pass the Nintendo lot check on the first try, but just because we wrote the line Switch Test Team instead of Nintendo Switch Test Team in the credits, so it was quite an easy fix. The critical response was positive. At the moment, the Metascore is 77 out of 100. While the game took shape, it was more evident it was targeted to people that usually read books, are sci-fi enthusiasts and engineers. In hindsight, it's a pretty small niche. We were afraid about the possibility that only the intersection of these sets of different players would eventually like the game. Luckily, the audience response was very positive. Who didn't like the challenging puzzles recommended the game for its story, while those who have not been thrilled by the narrative recommended the game for the gameplay logic and mechanics.
The community that bought the game is wonderful, and I have to thank all of them. Their comments in the Steam page are delicious.
Still There was presented at the Paris Games Week and the Game Connection in 2018, at the Gamescom, the Milan Games Week and the Game Room in 2019. A specific mention goes to the Milan Games Week. During this 3-day event, in a booth organized by the ISV Association, we let about 80 people play Still There. Watching their reactions was handy to make the game's initial part smoother for more different kinds of players. Of course, you cannot make something new if you don't do experiments, and by definition, when you experiment, you are not sure of the outcome. Anyway, we should have expected that experimenting in every aspect of the game at the same time will turn into something uncontrollable. As dope as it seems, we designed many puzzles only after creating the art they are based on. But eventually, we succeed in providing sense and coherence to any of the hundreds of details of the game. Except for a couple of switches. Yeah, there are 2 switches in the game that are completely useless. Sorry.
Working in a team remotely is not too easy, especially when everyone is doing experimentation. Any choice should be taken more lightly and less personal, and also should be analyzed from different point of view. Stay alert because many environmental and social factors can generate chaos in a small production.
One of the things, narrative-wise, that in hindsight maybe could be different in Still There is the final part, especially because one of the really important things about Still There's narrative was to not hold the hands of the player too much, especially towards the ending. And in that sense, it works because the ending of Still There is a complete ending, but is also left open for the player. But it does that narratively, but it doesn't do that emotionally, meaning that emotion-wise, we're really pulling the hand of the player and driving them towards the emotions that we want them to prove, to feel. And that is in a way a nice thing because emotions are important and it's always nice when a player can feel them. But on the other side, maybe it would have been nicer not to pull their hand too much towards a specific set of emotions, even if obviously it was a complexer, let's say, matter why those emotions were there, if they really could have been different or not. But that's a thought.
We knew some puzzles were quite challenging and targeted to a specific kind of player. For this reason, we added the Simplify button, a sort of escape pod useful to skip all the technical details while retaining the storytelling part of the puzzle. Unfortunately, that was not a working solution. We soon discovered that people would prefer selling their grandma on eBay rather than clicking on it.
A funny horror story about Still There, which sounds like a dichotomy, but it's really not, is the Italian translation, because I actually wrote Still There directly in English so that we could all bring it to publishers and also present it to a public that was, let's say, vaster than Italy. But then obviously we wanted to have it in Italian too, because we're Italians. So our idea was, okay, by the end of the game, I will translate what I wrote in English into Italian. It's gonna be easy because that's my main language. Instead, it was really a horror show because I realized that when your mindset is set for another language that is not yours, but all your mind is there, when you try to go back to your own, it's really, really, really complicated. And the whole team, Davide and Domenico and Armando, they helped me with the translation because I suddenly couldn't speak Italian anymore. I did terrible mistakes. So this is the fun horror story. Maybe not that fun.
Probably the real target audience is still a small niche. Many adventure game players are looking for nostalgic aesthetics, searching for games that make them remember the golden age of point-and-click adventures. But as much as we love those days too, Still There is not a tribute to them. Despite the final result, we lost a lot of time trying to remedy the incompatibilities of the outcomes of our experiments. With a different approach, the pre-production costs will be considerably smaller and the target audience will probably be wider. One important lesson learned is to avoid putting too many irons on the fire. Do one experiment at a time. And if you want to find the original gameplay, then start experimenting on that first.
So in the end, I'm just really happy that I was able to be a part of this project. I had a ton of fun working on it. A lot of the work was kind of split between two big working sessions with kind of a half-year gap or something in between. And it was a great deal of fun to kind of work on stuff and then put it aside and work on something else and put it aside and kind of have it all come together at the end. It was a lot of work, but really rewarding in the end. I'm so pleased with this soundtrack.
A very important part of Still There for every one of us was to put ourselves into the game, our vision, our personality, our passions. And so obviously all these visions didn't always agree with each other, or there were misunderstandings, or they completely clashed on many aspects of the game, from how the UI should work to what elements should be represented inside the station, etc., etc. But in the end, we really managed, considering that this was a small production, we really managed to take all of these very different visions, sometimes very different, and find a single one that was a coherent sum of what we actually wanted, which was very satisfying for us in the end.
Thank you for your attention.
You can find Still There on Steam, GOG, and the Nintendo eShop.
And if you wanted to listen to the soundtrack, you can find it on Spotify as well. But yeah, thanks so much.